now, these messages.
Hey, you! Are you tired of sitting around waiting for your packages to be delivered? Stop being such a fucking pussy and get UPS Business Plus Extreme! With UPS Business Plus Extreme, we'll bypass the cumbersome process of loading your packages onto trucks and fly the airplane directly to your business! Ground casualties, who gives a fuck? If it gets you your packages faster and makes us money, a few casualties are acceptable! Because at UPS, human lives are expendable! The Analogue 3D is a piece of shit. Let me back up. When the Analogue 3D was first announced, I was conflicted. On one hand, a brand new FPGA console allowing me to play my old N64 favorites, upscaled to a crisp 4K, sounded amazing. But my previous experience with their products and customer service had been less than stellar. Still, the Nintendo 64 was a huge part of my childhood, and the chance to replay some of my childhood favorites proved enticing. So I gave Analogue the benefit of the doubt and pre-ordered the 3D when they first went live in October of 2024, with a promised delivery date of early 2025. I was optimistic Analogue would deliver. The 3D had already been in development for 4 years prior to the pre-orders going live, and I thought that was more than enough time to develop a feature-complete product. What I never could have anticipated, however, is the release of the 3D would be one of the single most disappointing and frustrating product releases I've experienced in my lifetime. My first Analogue product was also my third. Let me explain. When I first made the mistake of starting a retro game collection, I started with the very first console I ever owned, the Nintendo Entertainment System. But I had a serious problem. Actually playing my growing collection of NES cartridges proved challenging. The issue was that when I hooked my NES up to a modern display, it looked like shit. And finding a CRT in decent working condition was already becoming extremely difficult. And even if you did find one, they're gigantic, bulky, and hard to work into your setup when you're a newlywed living in a tiny apartment saving for a house. So I started researching other options. I started to experiment with emulation, which provided an easy way to achieve a nice clean output to modern displays. It also gave me quick and easy access to a vast library of retro video games which could be acquired with minimal effort in complete collections online. There was only one problem. Simply downloading the games and playing them via emulation didn't scratch that nostalgic itch the same way real hardware did. The experience of putting a game into the console, powering it on, plugging in a wired controller, and plopping down on the couch for a few hours of retro fun was a vital part of the experience. I also explored using real hardware paired with an upscaler, which converts the low-resolution output of retro video game consoles into high definition, giving your old games a nice, crisp, pixelated appearance on modern displays. But upscalers required the technical knowledge to modify your hardware for clean RGB output to achieve the best results. And the upscalers were expensive, often costing hundreds of dollars, and retro gaming with real hardware was already a prohibitively expensive hobby going into the 2020s. But I learned there was a third option, a way to enjoy the experience of playing your physical retro games on modern displays without the hassle of modifying your consoles for RGB output through an expensive upscaler. FPGAs, or field programmable gate arrays, provided a way to recreate retro game hardware using modern technology and play your physical retro game collection with a clean, high-definition output on your modern television. And this technology is what powers all of Analogue's consoles. I had discovered FPGAs, and by extension Analogue, at just the right time. They were gearing up to release the NT Mini Noir, billed as the ultimate way to experience your NES library. Perfecting the design of the previously released NT Mini, which was known for having a floppy and unreliable cartridge slot, which would cause intermittent game crashes. It would also be their final run of the product. So I gave in to the fear of missing out and pre-ordered the NT Mini Noir, which was still several months from release. In the meantime, I snagged a Super NT and a Mega SG, Analogue's recreation of the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, respectively. And I enjoyed both immensely. Hours and hours of retro gaming goodness in HD in a simple plug-and-play format. I was elated, and my excitement for the NT Mini Noir reached a fever pitch. The Super NT and the Mega SG were nice consoles, but the NT Mini Noir was billed as their flagship product, housed in a milled aluminum shell, the definitive way to experience one of my favorite childhood consoles. My NT Mini arrived. I took my time opening the package, which felt very premium, high quality. God, I'm such a fucking loser. I took my time opening the package and looked over the console itself. It was hefty, solid, with a transparent bottom revealing the console's inner workings. It was slick, felt premium, and it certainly felt like it would live up to the hype. I carefully hooked up my console to the television, took my freshly and meticulously cleaned copy of Castlevania, firmly placed it into the Noir's perfected cartridge slot, and powered on the console. Then, nothing. The console didn't boot the game. Wow! 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 This really was the definitive, authentic NES experience. As it turns out, the Noir still had a very loose cartridge slot, and the game had a lot of play to wobble back and forth. This made it extremely difficult to get the games to boot on the console, often requiring multiple rounds of removing and reinserting the game until you hit the perfect angle to get the game to boot without issues. To be fair, when it worked quite well, providing the advertised NES experience with clean visuals on a modern television. And it was a ton of fun. The problem is, it never really did work like it was supposed to, which at $450 was not acceptable. So my NT Mini didn't get a whole lot of use. And when it did, the experience gradually degraded over time. After a year, it would take 10 to 15 minutes of inserting and reinserting the games to get them to boot, and something as minor as someone walking through the room or sitting down on the couch too hard would cause the games to crash, starting the entire process over again. It was terrible. This is when I would have my first interaction with Analogue's customer service. I'll spare you the details here because I'll get more into the issue later. But after spending a week jumping through hoops to explain the issue, I was informed that because my console was just over a year old, the warranty was expired, and it would cost well over $100 to repair my lightly used console. Even worse, Analogue expected me to send some of my games in with the console for diagnostic purposes. I refused. And my very expensive Analogue NT Mini was relegated to little more than a fancy doorstop. It was a very expensive life lesson. I'm telling you this so you know that by choosing to order the 3D, I was giving Analogue the benefit of the doubt that my experience was not the norm, and maybe I was just unlucky and had gotten a limit, but holy fuck, was I wrong. I pre-ordered the Analogue 3D in October of 2024 when they first opened, optimistic they would meet the early 2025 release window. I was wrong. They would not. November, December, January, and February went by with no updates, and the early 2025 release window was quickly slipping by. Finally, on March 18th, Analogue announced the 3D would be delayed until July, with no reason given as to why. Not necessarily a deal breaker, but disappointing nonetheless. Another long stretch passed without any communication from Analogue. Then, 2 weeks into July, Analogue once again announced the 3D would be delayed, this time until late August. The reason given was due to tariffs, the cost of which Analogue would absorb. And people were getting restless. Another 6-week delay paired with the lack of clear communication and the complete absence of gameplay footage gave rise to doubts the console would ever actually see release. And I want to state clearly, as many problems as Analogue has, they have always delivered a product to their customers in the end. Eventually, as late August approached with no communication, no demo units provided to content creators, and no gameplay footage, there would once again be another delay. In a bizarrely worded blog post on their website blaming unexpected, uncommon issues under esoteric circumstances, whatever the fuck that means, the 3D was delayed to a much more nebulous Q4. But to quote that post, Analogue 3D has been in development for 4 years, obsessively. It's at 99%. Hardware, system, packaging, the full kit has been set for months. The last 1% is where we're focused. After reading this, I couldn't even fathom that the console would be released in an unfinished or incomplete state, and I wouldn't have to wait much longer to find out. The 3D would finally ship in mid-September 2025. I received my unit about a week later. This was it. A year of excitement and nervous anticipation was about to pay off. The Analogue 3D, the ultimate Nintendo 64 experience. And after almost a year of delays, my expectations were at an all-time high. I was ready to relive a part of my childhood. I tore the tape off the package. A bright yellow leaflet was inside. 3D OS and controller update required. What the fuck was I reading? As it turns out, the console didn't even ship in a basic functional state. Before I could enjoy my brand new console, I would have to go through the process of installing and updating the firmware. Great. But the task should be simple, right? I could just hook up the console and use the built-in Wi-Fi to update the console over the air. Wi-Fi was advertised as a feature prior to release, and the logo was stamped directly onto the console itself, after all. Well, no, actually. And I'm not saying the console doesn't support updates over Wi-Fi. It doesn't support Wi-Fi at all, and still doesn't. And this is just one of the many missing features advertised prior to the 3D's launch. Also missing were save states, screenshots, support for most third-party controllers, even basic features present in the UI, like the playtime counter, didn't even work. These are the type of basic features one would expect from the N64 perfected. Unacceptable even under the most charitable circumstances, especially after a year of delays. And this isn't the first time Analogue has done this either. Previous consoles also launched with missing or incomplete features, like DAC support for the Pocket and the Duo, a feature promised that hasn't come to fruition even years later. These advertised features have since been quietly scrubbed from Analogue's website, despite the feature having never been officially canceled. And the problems don't stop there. The main selling point of the Analogue 3D is the clean 4K output on modern displays. But my console refused to output in 4K, even when connected to my 4K television, a problem I've never encountered with any previous device connected to the same television. This problem alone required almost 2 full days of troubleshooting before I could find a solution. And the customer support at Analogue provided no useful information helpful in solving the issue. Luckily, I would eventually find the solution on my own, and I wish my problems with the console ended there. On not one, but 2 separate occasions, the OS on my console corrupted, rendering the console unusable. This, once again, required several days of back and forth with Analogue's customer support to resolve the issue. And the process of contacting support is far more frustrating than simply sending them a description of your issue and waiting for a helpful reply. I was asked for the same information repeatedly, asked to send photos and videos, and the responses I received didn't resolve any of the issues I was having. I was given the same runaround when I contacted Analogue about my issues with the NT Mini. Once again, I had to find the solution on my own, which required me to replace the included SD card that housed the console's OS at my expense. But all that troubleshooting eventually led to enjoying a fully functional console, right? Well, no, actually, because in addition to all these more minor issues, I also had a major one. My 3D wouldn't even boot up half the fucking time. Instead, my console would simply flash blue and red lights, an issue which Analogue's website listed as a diagnostic code, which required contacting Analogue's customer support. Great. This led to another tedious round of back and forth, after which I was given a prepaid label to ship the console in for repairs. For a console previously billed as at 99%, the prospect of having to send it off for repairs less than 3 months after receiving it paints a poor picture of Analogue's quality control and manufacturing process. There's a better way this all could have been handled. I know firsthand. I recently took the time to catalog my game collection to get a better idea of how many games I have and how many I still need to play. By the end, I discovered that I had titles spanning 24 consoles, many of which I could not connect to my television. Enter RetroTink. Founded by Mike Chi, RetroTink produces a variety of upscalers that let you connect retro video game consoles to modern displays. As one of Analogue's competitors in the high-end retro hardware space, their flagship product, the RetroTink 4K, features a variety of inputs and upscales them to 4K over HDMI. So I ordered one, and it was promptly shipped, but the shipment stalled for several days in California with no updates. Concerned, I reached out to RetroTink and received a reply from Mike Chi himself the same day. His solution was simple: a replacement unit sent no questions asked with a prepaid label to return the original. A few days later, the new unit arrived exactly as promised. My experience with Analogue and RetroTink was night and day. Analogue treated my issues as an afterthought. RetroTink made resolving them a priority. Mike Chi, and by extension RetroTink, offered a prompt response, a decisive solution, and a high-quality product. After everything I went through with the Analogue 3D, the difference between the two companies couldn't be clearer. The Analogue 3D is as much a tragedy as it is a betrayal. Setting aside all of the problems, the gameplay experience of the console is actually quite enjoyable when it works. Everything feels right. And the CRT overlays with D-Blur make the games look simultaneously sharp and nostalgic. But I wonder how much the experience is actually being carried by the Nintendo 64's library of classic games. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. A product can only ever be as good as the company that produces it. And from my experience, it's clear that Analogue is a shitty company, not because of any singular mistake, but because of how they operate. What really drove the final nail into the coffin occurred before the technical issues with my console started to pile up. After all the delays, missing features, and technical issues, Analogue announced a line of highly desirable, translucent neon colorways for the Analogue 3D only 20 fucking days after the 3D shipped. These weren't for consoles yet to be manufactured and shipped at a later date. No, these units were available for pre-order for a single day and shipping 2 days later. Likely a calculated decision to entice people to double dip. Analogue completely and utterly fucked early adopters. And that's the problem with Analogue. Advertised as a premium retro gaming company, their real output is hype, FOMO, and artificial scarcity. With a long history of overpromising, under-delivering, missing features, delays, and poor communication, it's clear that the issues with the Analogue 3D aren't just isolated issues with a single console, but deep, systematic issues with Analogue's business model and customer service. Exploiting nostalgia, Analogue wants to charge you premium prices without providing a premium product. And they will do more than give you an inferior product. They will violate your trust. Analogue does not deserve your blind loyalty or your money. Better alternatives exist. Fuck Analogue.